A town hall session about OEEO processes at Miami University. This session is in response to Pillar 5, Recommendation 3, suggested by the President's DEI Task Force. My name is Anthony James, and I am the Interim Vice President of the Office of Institutional Diversity. The goal of this session is to help the community better understand OEEO processes at Miami University. The format of today's session will include a presentation by the panel, which includes addressing questions submitted when participants registered. This will be followed by a brief Q&A session. Please type your questions in the chat feature. Today's session will be recorded and posted on the Office of Institutional Diversity's website at a later date. Captioning is available for this town hall. Our captionist this afternoon is Ms. Nicole Hallman. We would like to thank the Accessible Technology Center for providing this service for us. Thanks again, and please join me in welcoming the staff for our Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity.
Thanks, Anthony. In the interest of time, I'm going to go very quickly through my introduction and then turn it over to the rest of the group. My name is Kenya Ash, and I joined the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity in 2006. I serve as the director of the office, as well as the university's Title IX coordinator and Section 504 and ADA coordinator. I also serve as the university's affirmative action officer and Title VI and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act officer. Colin Baer joined OEO in 2018 as the associate director responsible for investigations and training. Denise Eisen is one of our associate directors responsible for employment compliance and has worked for OEO for the past 5 years. Betsy Krieger is OEO's administrative assistant and came to the office in 2018. Mike Savnik is the other associate director responsible for employment compliance and has worked in OEO since 2017. The mission of the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity is to promote fairness and justice, ensure that each member of the Miami University community is and feels welcomed, feels included, and to foster a diverse and welcoming environment that is equally accessible for all who live, learn, work, and participate in activities at Miami University. OEO is charged to aid the university in compliance with federal, state, and university non-discrimination laws and policies. The office provides the following services to faculty, staff, students, and visitors to the university: information, consultation, training, and resources regarding non-discrimination, affirmative action, and equal opportunity. It serves as a mechanism for investigating reports of protected class-based harassment and discrimination. It oversees and supports the university's compliance with federal and state laws and university policies involving equal opportunity, affirmative action, and non-discrimination. I've been asked to address a couple of issues raised by the DEI task force this summer. First, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act states the following: no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So therefore, Miami University must comply with Title VI. Questions were raised about Miami's commitment to Title VI. So there was some concern that when you search Miami's website, Title VI doesn't appear. It's true that at the time these questions were raised, information about Title VI didn't appear on the website. So over the past few weeks, OEO has worked to add the federal, state, and university non-discrimination laws and policies directly to the OEO page. So if you go out to the OEO webpage, you'll see a tab at the top for the non-discrimination regulations that inform our non-discrimination policies. So we're still in the process of updating that page. You'll see some changes, but the content is there, and you'll see links that you can click on to take you directly to the federal and state regulations. And then there was also a suggestion made that Miami doesn't have a Title VI coordinator in the same way that it has a Title IX coordinator, or a Title VI office like it has a Title IX office. So Miami's non-discrimination policies are informed by several different laws, including Title VI and Title VII. And I serve as the university's Title VI and Title VII officer. The OEO has been and will continue to investigate Title VI reports as it investigates Title VII reports. Also, our office takes all reports of harassment and discrimination seriously, and that hasn't changed. With that being said, the suggestion that Miami has a Title IX office is incorrect. Miami does not, nor has it ever had, a Title IX office. Our Title IX group is made up of professionals from across the university, including Student Life, MUPD, ICA, the regionals, and OEEO. We all work together to coordinate the university's compliance. So Title IX requires certain coordination of response, investigation, and adjudication. Response and investigation of Title VI reports, on the other hand, are handled by OEO, while the adjudication is handled by a disciplinary office. And there was another claim that Miami doesn't have a way to report race-based harassment. That's also incorrect. So there are several mechanisms for reporting harassment, including racial harassment that Colin Baer will address in a few minutes. And I don't want to take any more time away from our presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Betsy to briefly describe the work that she does for the office. She'll be followed by Mike and Denise, who will provide a very brief description of their processes related to employment compliance. And then Colin will close by going over the investigation and reporting process. Betsy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Betsy Krieger. I've been at Miami University for 16 years in total, and in the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity for the past 2 years. As the administrative assistant in the office, I handle a lot of the standard administrative functions, scheduling, budget management, purchasing, etc. But a few things that I do that are a little bit more specialized to the office would include case file management, both the digital and hard copies of investigation files, to make sure everything's in the right place at the right time when we need it. I do oversee the online training for new faculty and staff. When they're brought on board, they are required to complete 3 online training courses, and I oversee that process. I also manage the labor law poster compliance on all Miami campuses. I've been assisting with the diversity conference logistics for the last 2 years, and I'm also active in helping with keeping our website current and up to date.
Thanks, Betsy. Mike and Denise.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Savnik, again, one of the associate directors. We will get started on the slides. So Betsy, you can move us forward one. Thank you. I'm just going to briefly go through this. I'm not going to read word for word all of this. Actually, I may end up doing that. But we just wanted to give a brief overview of what equal opportunity and affirmative action are. So equal opportunity is treating everyone equally and with fairness. And if everybody has taken the IT services accessibility training, there's that graphic that shows equity, equality, and liberation. Equal opportunity falls more in line with the equity of making sure that everybody has the same access to all opportunities. And so we want to ensure that all personnel policies, practices, and operations prohibit any kind of discrimination based on the items that Kenya mentioned, along with all of the other protected classes that are federally, state, and university protected and mandated. And we only use job-related, excuse me, and neutral criteria when we're making any kind of employment-related decisions. We want to stay away from any kind of subjective thoughts of this person is a good fit for this area. What does that mean? Does it mean that they're good at, their experience matches what you're looking for? Does it mean that they have the right personality? Does it mean that they look like everybody else in the office? It's something that we don't want to get anywhere near. So we always ask for only using neutral, objective, and job-related criteria. So tying into that is the idea and regulation of affirmative action. And I'll cover what affirmative action is and then what it is not. And you can see in the slide there what some of those points are. But essentially, at the highest level, affirmative action is eliminating barriers to equal employment opportunities through action-oriented programs. So absent discrimination over time, we should see that our workforce should generally reflect gender, racial, and ethnic profiles of the labor pool from which we recruit. So every search for unclassified, we do a pool review. And that's what this pool review does, is it looks to see what the pool looks like in comparison to what we should see given the job labor market from the areas that we determine every year when we put the plan together. Affirmative action is a management tool designed to ensure equal employment opportunity, and it creates an environment where equal opportunity can prevail. In no way, shape, or form is affirmative action reverse discrimination, quotas, preferential treatment, or guaranteed results. Part of the mandates of affirmative action and regulations require that the most qualified or best qualified individual is selected for the job. Nowhere does it say that anybody should be selected based on their race, gender, or ethnicity. So there's been a lot of confusion over the history of affirmative action as to what it is and what it isn't. So we just wanted to lay some of that out, that we do not work towards quotas, and it's not reverse discrimination. We're always giving the best qualified applicant, a candidate, the opportunity. So I'll hand it over to Denise.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending our town hall today. I'm Denise Eisen. I'm an associate director within the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity. I've been here approximately 5 years. I spent 16 years in human resources prior to that. OEEO's role as far as employment compliance, there's a couple of pieces that, Mike and I look at. We look at every fill vacant that the university, we've got an open position, we're going to hire for it. We look at every one of those open positions and look at the information from the department. What's the job description? Does the minimum qualifications hinder anybody from getting that position, from being able to apply for it? We don't want any barriers. But if there are barriers, is it necessary? When you have an electrician, the individual needs to be able to perhaps, get to lighting. Can they do that? Do they need an accommodation? So we don't want any barriers with job descriptions. So we look at every posting, every position prior to the posting within Page Up. We look at that job description to make sure there are no barriers. With regards to employment recommendations, we look at those as well. So when a candidate is recommended for the position, do they meet the minimum qualifications? Are they qualified to do the position that that department needs them to do and have those responsibilities? We look at only knowledge, skills, and abilities. As Mike said, we don't want to see where a department says this is the best fit, this person is the best fit, because what does fit mean? What we want to look at is every department has to put their reason for recommending a candidate. So what we want to see is, the candidate meets the education requirement, they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform the necessary duties of the position. So that's what we want to see. We want to just, concentrate on the job skills and what that person possesses, the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do that. We don't want to, look at a person's any kind of personality traits or anything like that. Promotions and reorganizations, if a department needs to reorganize based on different needs of the department, then we also look at that. Is everybody within the department given fair opportunity? Those who have the necessary skills and abilities to be, let's say, an associate director, getting ready to promote somebody. We look at that individual. Does the individual meet the minimum qualifications, and does he or she have the necessary skills? But also, is there anybody else within the organization that could potentially meet the qualifications and have the skill set to do that job. So we ask departments, we go back to them and say, why this person versus that person? You know, so they have to justify what they're doing. We make sure that there are no barriers. We make sure that everybody's giving equal opportunity to be promoted and to get a position or, you know, be recommended at a higher level. So we do look at all of that. The affirmative action program, Mike and I work on the affirmative action plan on behalf of the university. We look at our employee base. It's every employee on campus. What does the university look like? You know, like Mike said, we want to mirror availability. Who has a skill set within the labor market to perform the job duties of positions. So every year we have a report of every individual on campus and how they disclose. It's important to realize that this is how an individual discloses. And it's voluntary to disclose a disability. It's voluntary to disclose protective veteran status. And so, you know, it's all in how an individual feels comfortable and if they feel like they want to disclose. But I also want to mention that it's very limited individuals who see this information. When it comes to disability status and how an individual discloses, it is only OEEO who sees that information. So, you know, if individuals are hesitant to disclose a disability, I hope they feel comfortable in doing so and realizing that only OEEO sees that information. So if anybody has any questions, you know, regarding fill vacancies.
Real quick.
Sure.
I just wanted to add to that. So when a person discloses that information, for example, their disability, if they have a disability, it's tracked through our office specifically for affirmative action reasons, and it's not intended to document a person's disability with the university. So if someone does identify as someone with a disability, we're not then sending that information over to human resources, for example, to contact the person to see if they need an accommodation. But there is information that's included as part of the survey that directs individuals to the human resources office if they need an accommodation for a disability.
Right, thank you, Kenya, for mentioning that. Next slide, and I believe that Colin is our next presenter.
Yes, thank you. And it's good to, well, I can't really see anybody, but I appreciate everyone being here. My name is Colin Bear. I'm the Associate Director in charge of investigations and training. I've been at Miami for about 2.5 years now, and I have a total of 13 years in workplace investigations and equal opportunity investigations. I want to take us through these next few slides relatively quickly. As Kenya mentioned earlier, there's a number of laws that inform our policies that we are always in compliance with. And so really starting with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that guaranteed protections based on race, color, and national origin for employments, that includes sex and religion as well. But then over the years, additional laws come into play to also guarantee protections for protected classes that historically have been marginalized. So we're adding things to that, such as sexual orientation, gender identity, age. Title IX came along in 1972, providing additional guidance against discrimination on the basis of sex in public institutions. On the next slide, we've got the Rehabilitation Act that refers to protections based on disability in institutions that receive federal assistance. In the next slide, we have protections for protected veterans. There's more age discrimination laws, pregnancy discrimination. The Americans with Disabilities Act was a major piece of legislation that came across. Genetic information. On the next slide, we have some state laws that we're also in compliance with. So we have to follow federal and state and need to make sure that we're with all that. they have some additional information in there, such as military status, status as a parent or foster parent. And so all of that information sort of culminates when we put our policies together. On the next slide, we have the 3 major policies that our office it looks into and investigates if we have violations of those regulations, and that these policies cover. The policy prohibiting harassment and discrimination covers our list of protected classes for harassment or discrimination for those bases. We have 2 sexual misconduct protocols. If you pay attention to policy, you may have noticed that these policies are different than they have been in years past. It used to be called the Title IX protocol. Because of a major regulatory change this summer, these policies have been rewritten. The Office of Student Life and the Dean of Students Office and Office of Community Standards deserve a lot of credit for helping rewrite those policies as well. But we have a sexual misconduct protocol for students and a sexual misconduct protocol for employees and non-students. There are slightly different procedures for those particular cases depending on whether you're a student or not. On the next slide, we have the university statement of non-discrimination that really covers the philosophy and the values that we try to uphold at Miami. And that also lists the protected classes that we have in bold on the slide. We've got 14 protected classes that we cover in these policies, and particularly in the policy prohibiting harassment and discrimination. But these protected classes cover everybody. So it's not just those of us who are on the privileged end of these classes or those who are more marginalized. We want to make sure that these protections cover everyone. And that means all students, all employees, faculty, staff. It's going to include visitors and contractors too. So we have a wide umbrella for all of these bases. On the next slide, we've got a couple other university policies that cover accommodations, disability accommodations, religious accommodations. We need to make sure that we are covering all of those issues and offering the appropriate protections for people who need those accommodations. So there's a lot of things that we have to cover there, and we will investigate violations of any of those things if that information is brought to our attention and we're able to follow up. We want to make sure we have the opportunity to address that. And so on the next slide, really the most important thing that I want any employees to walk away from this presentation or any of our training presentations is their duty to report. So all employees at Miami, I don't care if you're administrator, staff, faculty, whatever your title is, if you're an employee at Miami, you have a duty to report if you become aware of possible violations of these policies. So violations of the sexual misconduct protocol need to be reported to the Title IX coordinator or the deputy Title IX coordinator, depending on who is involved. Violations of the policy prohibiting harassment and discrimination are required to be reported to our office, to OEEO, so we can follow up on it appropriately. In a few slides, I will talk about exactly how to report those things and what sort of information you need to report. But this policy covers every single employee here. Students, by and large, do not have the same duty to report. There are some students in certain roles who do have that same obligation. That's going to include graduate assistants, resident assistants in the residence halls, orientation leaders, student managers, if students are employed on campus and have a management position, they also have that same duty to report that the rest of us as employees have as well. On the next slide, I'd like to discuss some of the misconceptions that come along with our duty to report obligations and some of the confusion that arises from duty to report. I have conversations almost every day with folks about their duty to report and what they should be reporting to us, and how that works, and trying to clarify some of these things. And so these are some of the issues that often come up. First of all, sending a report to our office does not automatically result in an investigation. The first thing that we always do when we receive a report is we will reach out to the complainant or to the victim, the person who is impacted by the alleged harassment or discrimination. We will reach out to them to open the door to have a conversation. We're going to give them some policy information. We're going to offer some resources to them, but we want to give them the opportunity to come talk to us in further detail so they can decide what they want to do. Sometimes the complainant wants to pursue a formal action. Sometimes they don't. So a report will trigger that conversation process. It does not automatically trigger a full-blown investigation. If you're a faculty member and you have students that disclose information to you, it's a very, very good idea to make sure that your students know that you have a duty to report if you become aware of some of this information. But it's also a good idea to let them know that, again, a report won't automatically trigger an investigative process. Someone will reach out to them instead to explain options and offer resources. So the student will still be able to choose how they would like to respond or if they would like to respond. One important thing for faculty members to remember is that if a student discloses information during a class discussion or as part of a class project or a paper or something of that nature, that should trigger the faculty member to follow up with them, let them know they have a duty to report, but also ask them if they intended to disclose that information so the faculty member could report it. You know, some of you may be teaching in some areas where the subject matter of discrimination or harassment or bias or sexual assault, any of these issues might come up as part of your coursework. And so a lot of information is often disclosed during that. That is an opportunity to have conversations with students about your obligations, but make sure you understand that their intent as well. And in a situation outside of that, someone is disclosing information to you, they might tell you that they don't want you to report it further. They don't want to escalate it further. However, you are still going to be required to report that information in that situation. So a lot of people are uncomfortable with that, and that's pretty natural. So go ahead and give them that reminder that, hey, this is not going to automatically escalate when I send this report in. Someone will be reaching out to you to provide options and resources to you. You are still in control. You know, it can be an uncomfortable situation sometimes for the reporter and for the complainant. They're probably coming to you out of a place of trust, either as a colleague or a friend or an instructor or a person in a position of assumed authority. And so they're bringing this information to you. But we hear two different sides of the story about why someone does or does not want information to be reported further. Sometimes it's just coming to you out of confidence. It's a trust issue, and a lot of folks may fear that by reporting it further to our office or to some other office that they don't know may be a violation of that trust. But the other end of that is often we will hear stories of somebody saying, hey, I reported this to someone in authority, someone I trusted, but then nothing was ever done. I never heard anything. And in those cases, if we never had the opportunity to follow up, never had the opportunity to address the situation or at least offer support services, then how are we going to address these situations on campus? And so sometimes it can be an awkward situation, but what you really need to do in those situations is report that information to us so we have the opportunity to reach out so we can address these situations, offer resources, and hopefully find a way to either remedy the effects of what happened or prevent its reoccurrence. And that's what will help us keep our campus safer. On the next slide, some other pointers about what sort of information you should report. Basically, we just want you to report whatever it is that you do know. You're probably not going to know all of the information about a situation. Someone may disclose to you, last night, a friend of mine had this happen to them. You might not even know a name, you might know a date, you might know maybe some of the details of what happened, but you're not going to know it all. We don't really want you to investigate that any further. We just need you to report that information so we can start to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Sometimes what happens is you may have a small piece of the information, but if everyone is exercising their duty to report, and we start to get other bits of information about that same incident, then the picture becomes a little bit more clear. You might have one or two pieces of the puzzle, but we can collect the other pieces as we bring in this information and as we are able to investigate it further if need be. So there's no such thing as too much information. There's no such thing as too little information. We just need to get the information that you do have, and then we can follow up from there. There are some limited exemptions to duty to report. Folks who are in a licensed counseling position, folks who are collecting that information under IRB approved research. If information is disclosed in public programs such as Take Back the Night, where people are sharing personal stories, but it's in a public forum such as that, you don't necessarily need to report that same information. There are some confidential circumstances, such as being a counselor, and then the other situations with research or public programs like that, where you don't need to, where it doesn't trigger that same duty to report. And again, if anyone ever has any questions about, should I report this? What should I do? What information do I need? What do I do with this? Please feel free to reach out to our office and we can talk through the situation and figure out whether or not you do have that duty and what you need to provide. And Kenya clarified in the chat too that the Take Back the Night, those sort of events, that refers to the sexual misconduct protocol only. That doesn't necessarily apply to the policy prohibiting harassment and discrimination. Thank you for clarifying that. Do not assume that someone else has already reported the incident. We've had cases before in the past where something happens. Let's say someone says something offensive and there are multiple witnesses in the room, and we had, let's say for example, 6 people sitting around the table that heard the same thing, and we don't get that report because maybe each person assumed that someone else was going to report it. There's so many of us that heard this this terrible joke or this offensive comment that surely someone else is going to report it. I don't need to worry about it. Well, in those situations, those assumptions lead to no report coming to our office. And so this is a real situation that's actually happened. Months later, we will get additional reports about continued behavior. It has escalated, it has gotten worse. And now instead of just a single comment that someone heard, now we've got a pattern of severe and pervasive behavior. We find out later that this has been going on for months, when we could have had the opportunity to address it earlier, possibly nip it in the bud before it does escalate into a worse situation, had we known. So go ahead and report that information, even if you think other people are reporting that. You don't know. Somebody might tell you that, hey, I'm going to report this, or hey, you should report this to OEEO. Everyone really needs to be doing that. If I get 8 reports about the same information, that's not going to bother me at all. And all the information is useful. And people might have different perspectives about the same thing that they saw or the same thing that they heard. That helps us really just understand the situation a little bit better, and it helps clear up the picture for us. So like I said earlier, there's no such thing as too much information. Go ahead and send us that report. And then an important thing to remember too is if you are the victim, it is your choice to report or not. You know, especially depending on the severity of the situation, you know, we're not in the business of, you know, twisting someone's arm if something has happened to them to share their story if they're not ready to share that yet. We don't want to re-traumatize someone who's still processing something that happened to them. The purpose of duty to report is to give us an opportunity to reach out so we can offer options, we can offer resources when the victim is ready, when the complainant is ready. So if you are a third party, or if you are a bystander, if you become aware of this, you have that obligation to report. If it happens to you, it will be your choice. And if you get that email from our office or from one of us that says we received a report about you, please let us know if you would like to talk about it further. You know, we will give you some policy information. We will open that door. You can decide if you want to reach out to us if you're ready to do that. We'll probably follow up a couple of times. If we don't hear from you and you change your mind later, or if things get worse and then you decide to reach out to us, we can always reopen that file. We will have that information there. So we want to make sure that we, you know, respect whatever you might be going through as a victim. On the next slide, we have some questions that frequently come up when we're going through these processes, when I'm talking to folks about duty to report, and when we're talking about our investigative process. So to start with, we're going to talk about how can I submit a report. On some of the later slides in this presentation, there's going to be some a chart and a couple web pages that you can see how to submit a report. You can send it over email. You can call us. We have online forms that you can access on the OEEO webpage. So there's a variety of ways that it can get to us. We just want to make sure that we get that information. It doesn't matter how you submit it to us. We just want to make sure that it gets there. There are a number of ways to submit concerns at Miami. If we have a case that does not necessarily rise to the level of harassment or discrimination, maybe it's a bias incident, something that happens on campus that you've either observed or experienced an active bias, but maybe doesn't quite rise to actual discrimination, you can submit a bias incident report as well. That doesn't come to OEEO. The bias incident reports actually get distributed to the Vice President of Institutional Diversity. Anthony James, actually on this call, will receive those reports. And the Dean of Students will also receive those so they can respond. If the information in those reports refers to something that our office should address, they'll go ahead and forward it to us so we can respond appropriately. And then Ethics Point is another option for reporting unethical conduct on campus, whether it's harassment or discrimination or some other form of ethics violation. You can submit that through Ethics Point. You can submit it anonymously through Ethics Point. That information actually goes to the General Counsel's office, and then they will distribute that information to the appropriate office as needed. The benefits of an anonymous report through Ethics Point is that someone can continue to communicate and follow up on information anonymously through that portal, but anonymous reports are very difficult to investigate as well, because we might need certain information that an anonymous reporter might not be able to provide, or an investigation might expose the people involved. And so there are some complications involved in an anonymous report. You just need to keep that in mind. What happens when OEEO receives a report? Well, like I said earlier, the very first thing that we do when we receive a report is we will reach out to the complainant or the potential complainant to give them the opportunity to talk about the incident in further detail with us. We're going to give them the options. We're going to give them some resources. But the complainant is not required to meet with us once we reach out. They can choose if or how to respond. And we're going to conduct a preliminary assessment of the report once we receive it If we have a conversation with the complainant, we're going to gather more details, and we want to figure out what happened, what's going on. Is it something that is appropriate for an investigation? Is it something that needs to be forwarded to another office? Sometimes we will get reports that maybe are better addressed by a personnel office. Let's say if we have an incident that includes some sort of interpersonal disputes, but protected class is not the reason. In that case, without protected class being the underlying cause, it's probably not appropriate for OEEO, but we can involve human resources or academic personnel to help address the situation. If we have a student situation, similarly, we can involve the Office of Community Standards to look at it as a student conduct issue if it doesn't quite meet our jurisdiction. So we will talk to other offices to make sure that it's handled appropriately. But if the allegations rise to an actual policy violation, meaning that if true, this incident would rise to harassment or discrimination based on protected class, or could be a violation of the sexual misconduct policy, then we can launch an investigation. And that is if the complainant wishes to move forward with that. So as I mentioned earlier, the complainant is going to be in control of this process. They will get to choose what steps happen, what needs to work. So the complainant can decide to move forward with an investigation if the allegations would rise to a policy violation, if true. A complainant can also request an informal resolution in a harassment or discrimination case based on protected class. So we can engage in informal resolutions. Sometimes, even if the complaint we received does not rise to a policy violations, it might give us an opportunity to address the situation before it does get worse. So we sit down and have a conversation with someone to, let them know that, hey, if this behavior continues, it might turn into a policy violation. You might be facing an actual investigation here. So if this is true, it needs to stop. Sometimes we have a lot of good results with those sorts of conversations as well. So there's a number of different ways that we can address things outside of an investigation. But sometimes a complainant requests that no action be taken, or at least no action be taken quite at this time. And that's okay. The complainant can decide that. We can always reopen a case later if the complainant changes their mind, or if things escalate, if things get worse, we can go back and address it. And if we have a situation where we attempt an informal resolution, but the situation does not get better, that's not going to stop us from launching an investigation later if the complainant wishes to do so, and if that's the appropriate path to take. But either way, we will keep all of that information internal to OEEO. We will keep files on all of the reports we receive, so we can look for patterns of behavior. We can look at, well, who have we had this conversation with, or how many times have we received reports about this person, so we can really be aware of what's going on our campus and try to prevent these things if we have the opportunity, or address them if we find out about harassment or discrimination after the fact. Will a report be included in someone's personnel file? The answer to that is no, unless we have a full investigation that results in a finding of a policy violation. In that case, it becomes a matter of a disciplinary record, in which case that does show up in your personnel file. But generally speaking, reports that our office receives don't go anywhere outside of our office. We keep all that information internal for our purposes, so we can keep track of those patterns and be aware of what sort of allegations are floating around out there. Some situations are not necessarily appropriate for investigation. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. If the allegations, even if true, do not rise to a policy violation, then we won't launch that investigation. A situation like that would probably be more appropriate for an informal resolution or some other form of conversation to try to address it. Or if we need to bring another office into the situation, a personnel office, the student conduct office, to also evaluate the situation based on other policies, then we can do that, but it might not result in an OEEO investigation. If a complainant doesn't want to move forward with an investigation, unless we have a public safety situation or something else that's more severe that we would have to investigate, then a complainant can decide not to investigate. Sometimes we'll hear that, hey, this situation was reported. I reported it myself about, someone else, but then I didn't see anything was done. There was no investigation. Well, that may be the choice of the complainants in that case to not pursue an investigation. And so we have to, balance the wishes and respect the wishes of the complainants in those circumstances. And then a question that often comes up is about confidentiality. Our processes, our investigations are considered a non-confidential process. And that doesn't mean that we start distributing information everywhere willy-nilly. When a report comes to us, we will still act with as much discretion as we possibly can. But if it turns into an investigation, we can't enforce any gag orders. We can't force people to shut up about it, basically. When we conduct an investigation, that will include talking to witnesses. We will review documentation. We might need to collect information from other people. And the more people that we involve in an investigation, the less confidential it becomes. And so that's an unfortunate circumstance out of all of this, but sometimes we need to include other people, and we need that the information that those folks can provide. Now, even though we can't force them not to talk about it with others, every single person I sit down with will have a discussion about retaliation. So I can't force you to shut up about it, but I can discourage any sort of unnecessary conversation. I'm going to discourage you from confronting anyone about this investigation. Those sort of actions, those sorts of discussions can have a retaliatory impact, and retaliation is strictly prohibited in all of those policies that I mentioned earlier. We want people to bring this information to us. We need people to be comfortable in how these processes work and be comfortable sharing their concerns with us, so we have an opportunity to follow up and keep our campus safe. If everybody feared retaliation for coming to us, if people thought that there were going to be negative repercussions for participating in an investigation, for bringing a report to us, or for opposing harassment or discrimination, then we want to be able to address any of this stuff. No one would bring that information to us. No one would trust the process, and people wouldn't feel safe sharing this. And that would be bad for our campus if that happened. And so we take retaliation very, very seriously. We discourage any unnecessary conversation and confrontations about an investigation. And from time to time, we'll have to give extra reminders about retaliation and make sure that people aren't doing anything that crosses that line. And we will investigate retaliation, even if we don't have a finding in the initial complaint. But coming back to the confidentiality question, no, the processes aren't strictly confidential because we can't really control what people say or do once they're aware of an investigation. There are confidential resources available at Miami and outside of Miami that someone can go to if they're not comfortable pursuing any action through our office, but they still need some additional assistance. Some of those confidential resources would include counseling resources. There are a number of hotlines. There are advocacy services, one of which is Women Helping Women, which is an advocacy group. They have an office here on campus, and they will support anyone who has experienced sexual assault, sexual harassment, things of that nature. The student counseling service is available for students who need some counseling resources. The employee assistance program is available for employees who need some confidential resources. And so a lot of that information is available in these policies, especially the sexual misconduct protocol, and available on the Miami websites. And if anyone has questions about confidential resources, then feel free to reach out to our offices, or Human Resources may be able to provide information as well, or the Office of Student Life can also provide information about confidential resources. All right, on the next slide, we'll talk about the investigative process a little bit, in addition to what I've already mentioned. During an investigation, if a complainant wishes to pursue an investigation, and if the allegations would rise to a policy violation, if true, we will send notice of that investigation to the respondent. So that's the person who's accused of committing those violations. And we will give the respondent written allegations so they can appropriately and fairly respond to what they've been accused of. OEEO will remain neutral throughout that investigation. So as an investigator, I will not advocate for either side. I'm going to listen to both sides. I want to give both sides a fair opportunity to present their information, present evidence that we can collect. I will interview witnesses. We will collect documentation. It's a fact-gathering effort at the very beginning. A typical investigation in a harassment or discrimination case will typically last about 30 calendar days, and that'll give us time to interview those witnesses and collect that documentation. A sexual misconduct case may last a little bit longer. Of course, we still want to conduct those investigations in a reasonable amount of time, but there are other steps to that process which may make it go a little bit longer as well. But we will still, remain neutral and, gather evidence from both sides in all of those cases. Again, retaliation is prohibited, and I will talk to every complainant, every respondent, every witness about retaliation during the course of these investigations. And an investigation concludes with a letter of finding in which we summarize the evidence that has been gathered, and will include a finding of reasonable cause or no reasonable cause that we believe that a policy has been violated based on the weight of the evidence. If there is a finding of a policy violation, then we send that case to the next level of authority. So if you're a faculty member and you've been found in violation of policy, we're going to send that to the provost's office and academic personnel. If you're a staff member, that'll go to Human Resources. If you're a student, it'll go to the Office of Community Standards. Our office, OEEO, does not make the disciplinary decisions. We'll gather the evidence, we'll analyze the evidence, we'll come up with a conclusion based on that evidence, but then the next step, the corrective action, is made by a different office. And each investigation does have a review option, basically an appeal option available. The Vice President of Institutional Diversity will review those requests if for some reason the finding in the case is alleged to have been erroneous, or if there's other evidence that's available that was not considered during the initial investigation, or if there is some error in the process, then there are grounds to review that. All right, on the next slide, this shows us where to report your concerns. I mentioned this earlier, talking about where to report, how to report. So it depends on the situation. So if we have an issue of discrimination or harassment based on protected class, send that to OEEO. So Kenya is our director, and I'm the investigator. You can send those allegations to either one of us, and we will respond and move forward to whatever extent is appropriate. For a sexual misconduct issue involving employees, you're going to send that to the university's Title IX coordinator. And again, that is Kenya. And so she will respond to the complainant and offer resources to the employees involved in those cases. If we have a sexual misconduct issue involving students, that'll need to be reported to the Deputy Title IX Coordinator. Gabby Drawley, who is the now the Associate Dean of Students, is the current point of contact for that. There's going to be a new Deputy Title IX Coordinator hired at some point soon. So until that, Gabby will still be the source of contact for that. Gabby is also a great resource of information for students, as she will provide support services and resources and can answer a lot of questions and connect students with appropriate support services as needed. And if we have sexual misconduct involving students on the regional campuses, Bernice Hamilton is the point of contact for that. So if you have any students or have any dealings on the regional campuses, that's another wonderful source of information and resources in Bernice as well. Now, all of our offices, all the different folks that touch sexual misconduct issues and these sort of policy violations, we are often in contact with each other. We all talk to each other. So even though a lot of us are in different offices, if information comes to one of us that really needs to be addressed by someone else, we will report that information onward. After all, you know, I have a duty to report just like you do. So if I get a sexual misconduct report involving a student, I'm not going to investigate that, but I will forward that on to Gabby. Or if it's an employee issue, I may end up investigating that down the road if need be, but first I'm going to report that to Kenya so she can offer resources and support services as needed. On the next slide, we have a reporting form on the OEEO website. And basically that report it button right there will take you to an online form, and you can fill out whatever information needs to be reported, and that'll get sent to our office. So you can use this, you can call us, you can email us, you know, it doesn't matter how we get that information. We want to make sure that those options are available to you. And then on the next page, we have the links to the bias incident report and ethics points and some of the other reporting forms that are available at Miami. And so all of the information on this slideshow, we will share with the task force so they can make it available. They can distribute it as they need to. So you can go back and reference this information. You can follow some of these links if you need to submit a report or if you need to review any of this information. It's also all available on the Miami website. So go ahead and search and you should be able to find the information there. And on top of anything else, if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you need clarification on policy or procedures, please email us, please call us. We're always happy to have those conversations so we can fill everyone in on the nuances of how the stuff works. It can get confusing, it can get kind of messy. We want to make sure that we are there so we can address those concerns and answer those questions. So I know I've monopolized much of the time here. We're getting on 1 o'clock. I think I've answered through the course of this discussion all the questions that we had. But that's all I've got here. So, you know, all our pictures and contact info are on the last slide of the presentation here. Does anybody have any final questions they'd like to submit? Or I'd like to open it up to the other panelists here if anybody else has any final thoughts or questions. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. I know it's 1 o'clock here. I don't know if Anthony or Vika or Amy had any final words to share.
Yes, this is Anthony. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. I didn't see any questions in the Q&A. I wanted to let everyone know that we will post this on the institutional diversity site so that it is accessible. We also want to apologize about the closed captioning issue. We did receive word from Zoom that there was some issues with their server, so we apologize for that. We did provide the backup, and we want to make sure that this is accessible when we post it on the site. And looks like we are at 1 p.m. I want to just double check the questions here. Okay, so let me make sure I thank everyone for joining us for today's town hall. Please join us next month for a discussion with the Office of General Counsel. Please join me in thanking our presenters from OEEO as well as our moderator, Ms. Amy Shaman from University Advancement. And unless there is anything, that concludes our presentation for today. Thanks again for joining us.